Silent Death, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program Science Harder Campaign. Today, we're going to start out with a space plane launch. Dudrik is flying the ferry, which is the plane we're going to use to get the people from the solar base. Since it can't land itself, we'll have to offload the crew onto this and then bring them down. It's still about a week until the solar base enters the atmosphere and slows itself down. But I forgot to do the keep a Kerman in orbit for 2 days contract that we got last episode. So we're going to leave a Dudrik flying around up there for about a week to finish that contract, and then just have this use up that launch window, or this launch window. Since we don't really have anything else pressing to do right now. So we'll just get him into orbit and leave him there, and he can have some fun fast forwarding and stuff. Now it is time to test our landing script for our Chaos probe here, our Chaos test bed. Had to get rid of the heat shield. Launched this a few episodes ago from a space plane, and there was a bug with the orientation of the root part having issues with how KOS holds its heading and stuff. But first, let's look at the scripts themselves. Okay, for the landing script. Again, if you do not want to watch me going over the scripts themselves, you can click on the annotation right around here and skip past this part. Moving on, there's been some changes to Chaos between the last time we looked at our scripts, so there's been some changes to our other scripts. For one, our execute node script has been moved into functions and such. So lib node utilities. So we have the calculate vessel stats, which calculates the delta V and mass of each stage. And it's pretty much exactly the same as the one that we had in the execute node. So we aren't really going to go over that. Then we have a find burn time, which takes an argument, how much delta V, then uses the values calculated from here to find the total burn time. And the function execute burn does not actually work. There's some reason functions have a problem with certain things, and I'm not sure all the things that it has a problem with, but one of those is things like lock steering. Another one is arrays, which is how we're storing all of our vessel stats. So I'm not entirely certain what all is causing the problems, but we had to come over here, and we pretty much put the whole function inside of its own script. I made some slight changes to the burn script from the one that's in execute node, using some suggestions from the updated documentation for Chaos. We have this part here, and I believe this part here. Nope, that's not new. This part here is different. So, just doing VDOT to check to make sure that we're still pointing, or that the maneuver node is still pointing the same way that it started out pointing the same direction. If the maneuver node moves to the other side of the nav ball, it'll stop here. And then, down here, we'll just finalize the burn. This does quite a bit better getting the last little bit of the burn time, or the thrust burn, than the previous script that I had. But just those couple little changes was all that was needed. Now then, go back to land. So we have these arrays list, as they're called in this chaos language. And we also have check engine, which is also in its own script due to problems with functions. But that was also in the execute node thing. It's called up here, run check engine. So we get our arrays. They're calculated here. This returns an array, or a list, of the stage mass, stage fuel mass, stage engine thrust, stage engine ISP, and stage delta V. In here we're just basically making those global things. Now we need to find where the orbit crosses the equator. And that is called by libFindEquator. The function of findEquator has parameters: start time, delta t, the seek latitude, and the precision. So what it does is it takes our current position at start time and gets the latitude and longitude of that. Then it takes the future position, so its current position, or the position at start time plus a delta t, get the lat and longitude of that. Then we see how much the latitude has changed over delta t. And then we try to predict where the latitude is going to be 0 based on the rate of change. So that little bit of math here, since it could be a negative or positive. And then the prediction, somewhere right around here. So the time to node is going to be the time to crossing it. And we make sure that the time to node is no greater than the time it takes to orbit. And then we check to see what the actual latitude will be at that time. So if latitude is greater than precision, that means that if we're not close enough to 0, as the point we're going to cross, the point we're looking for is 0, then we wait precision, just to make things do things. And then we return, we call the function itself. So we're calling ourselves, making this a recursive function. Then start time plus time to node, delta t seek. So we're basically saying, okay, check again, but this time check from where we think we should be based on the value here. And then it will return that. If it is close enough to 0, if we're within position of the equator, then it just returns the time to node. And that will give us the approximate time where we're going to cross the equator. So we use that to calculate the orbital period here. And we're calling that period. So here's the formula for orbital period: 2 times pi times the square root of the semi-major axis cubed divided by the gravitation constant. Print that out. Now we adjust the time to make sure that it's the nearest orbit. So if the time to equator minus our current time is greater than an orbital period, we subtract that until that is no longer the case. Now we want to find which side is facing the sun. So we're going to cross the equator twice. And presumably one of those is going to be closer to the sun. We want to do our best to land in daylight so that we don't run out of power. So position 1 is going to be time to equator. Position 2 is going to be time to equator plus half an orbital period. And this minus ship body position just makes that, it basically moves the what it considers a 0 to be the center of whatever we're orbiting, instead of based on where the ship is at. Now then, if position 1 minus sun position, the magnitude of those two vectors is greater than position 2 minus the sun position dot magnitude, then we set the time to equator to be time to equator plus half an orbit. Otherwise, time to equator does not get changed. And now we have time of equator. It's basically how long from now it's going to be until we cross the equator. Time to equator is how long, or when we cross the equator in the absolute game time. And this is how long from now, which now is time colon seconds. And we just print out those two values. Now we want to find the terrain height at the landing spot, or basically where we cross the equator. And we're going to do this one orbit from now. So position at time to equator plus 1 orbit. And we just get the terrain height of that, so that tells us the terrain height. Now then, we're setting a node that is, I think, 1/4 of an orbit. Yeah, it's 1/4 of an orbit from the equator. And we're setting our periapsis to the radius of the ship, or the whatever we're orbiting. So we set our periapsis to be sea level. Using this to calculate our semi-major axis with those two predictions, and then we calculate the velocity we need to be going so that this is true, so that our periapsis will be at sea level, assuming that we have a node that's 1/4 of an orbit from where we cross the equator. Then we do a new node at that time and those velocities. So here's how much we need to burn to be going that fast. This is kind of a guess. This whole area is a guess to see our landing burn, how far we need to decelerate so that we actually cross our impact right at the equator. And this is just kind of our initial guess for that calculation. Now we calculate the altitude at landing. And this is going to be the actual altitude where we cross over the equator. So that could be positive or negative depending on how close our guess was. And this whole area here is refining our guess. So until the altitude of landing is within 100 meters, it's basically until the altitude above the terrain is within 100 meters, or the altitude where our orbit crosses the equator is within 100 meters of the surface. What we do is we adjust this. We adjust our periapsis by an amount equal to altitude at landing divided by 10, or 1, whichever is greater. And then we keep calculating that, so all this is the same as was above. And we're adding a new node so that it's using our prediction to check the altitude at landing. And we do this a whole bunch of times until we get close enough. After that happens, wait a second, then output what we're actually going to impact. And there will be a node here that's going to be our initial landing burn. Then we set up a staging leap, and we perform the maneuver, or execute the maneuver node from up here. So we just run execute burn, find a burn time, new node, delta V magnitude. And both of these are functions. Both execute burn requires an argument of the burn time. Find burn times requires an argument of the node delta V. Then we recalculate our vessel stats. Since we've burned a little bit. And then we check when to start our actual landing burn. So we're already heading towards the surface, and we're going to crash at this point in the script. And we need to find when we need to start the kind of last little suicide burn type thing. So first we find the first surface velocity at the point where we cross the equator. Then we calculate the burn time based on that surface velocity. So how long will it take us to completely negate our surface velocity going the speed where we cross the equator? Then, using that, we calculate the average acceleration. We adjust for 90% acceleration, just to give us kind of a 10% margin of error. We calculate a new burn time based on that average acceleration. Then we calculate the distance traveled during that burn. So basically, how far we'll be going in the time it takes us to go from surface velocity to 0. How far we travel, which is going to be the initial velocity times time plus 1/2 times acceleration plus time squared, which is kind of, one of the basic physics equations for velocity and stuff. And then we calculate the time to start burn. So that's going to be time to equator plus 1 orbital period when we're actually going to be crossing the equator, minus, so this is going to be the offset, distance traveled divided by surface velocity. So basically, I just want to say, move my landing burn back so that distance traveled, or let's see, so that we'll travel, hard to say this is not going well. We want to start our burn so that the distance traveled, or start our burn so that we're distance traveled from impact. That's what that's trying to say. So ideally, this will mean that once we hit 0 surface velocity, we'll be like right above the ground. And then we put a node right there. We don't give it any velocity values because we're not going to use the node to calculate that. And now we're going to wait till we get to this equator node. So until the ETA to node is less than or equal to 30, we just wait. And when it is less than or equal to 30, we set the warp to 0, basically turning off the warp. We lock the steering to surface velocity retrograde. And then, so up to that point, we've been locked the steering to sun position, our sun position. So we're pointing our solar panels towards the sun. And this points us towards the surface retrograde. Gives us 30 seconds to make that turn between pointing at the sun and pointing at retrograde. Keep waiting until it's time to actually start the burn. We toggle our gear. We have to do on and off and on again because you know how gear is. When you launch, it's on even if the gear is raised. And then here is the starting of the actual burn. So we're using a sort of PID controller for part of this, for the very last part. The first part, we're just setting the throttle to 90% and waiting until we've either landed. We're going less than 5 meters per second. Our horizontal velocity is less than 0.01 meters per second. So when either one of those happens, we come down here. We add this little thing here. When we're 10 meters or less than 10 meters above the surface, we lock the steering to up and turn off the solar panels. Kind of a emergency override type thing, since this will preempt anything that happens below it. And then we lock our vertical speed to ship vertical speed. That's basically our vertical speed, I guess. Desired speed is our altitude divided by 10 minus 2. So that means that we'll have a minimum speed of 2. A minimum vertical speed of 2. With a maximum speed of our altitude above the terrain divided by 10. And now we do a PID loop to make sure that our vertical speed, our actual vertical speed, is our desired speed. So what we want our speed to be and what our speed actually is. The PID thing is just copied from the documentation. We just copied this entire function here, and we're using that as is. Then we keep running the script until ship status equals landed. So we keep running until we're actually landed. Once we're landed, we unlock the steering, we unlock the throttle, we set the throttle to 0, turn on SAS, we wait a second, and we extend the panels. And that is the entire landing script. So let's see if this actually works. Okay, let's run the script and see how it actually works. Run land. Calculating the vessel stats. Now then finding the equator, which should not take very long. And adjusting our burn. So that we impact at the equator or within 50 meters of it. So apparently somewhere around right in here, which is right. Now then we have to wait 30 minutes, about an orbit, until we get to a burn. Let's fast forward a little bit. We're also pointing towards the sun. You can see that we chose our node so that we land on the side closest to the sun. Not much of a burn because we have a very low orbit. I'm not sure how well it would work with a larger orbit. I haven't really tested that part. Using the alarm clock to kind of throttle our warping a little bit. Otherwise we'll go a little bit too fast. Go a little bit faster though. Now then, we need to point towards the node. Running the execute burn now. And in a few seconds. And you can see that was a whole lot better than our previous execute burn script. And this is apparently where we need to start the landing burn, which is going to be a little bit of a problem because it looks like we're going to crash. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But time to burn is in about 10 minutes. We are again facing the sun. On power, pretty good. This may not work actually because of the hills. Bit of a bad luck there. We'll have to wait and see. Which is why we launched 2 probes. Or at least 2 probes to dress. Then again, it might work. We'll have to wait and see. It's going to be close. Don't have a whole lot of fuel left in this section. The landing gear are out. There goes that. Now we're slowing down much faster. So I guess we may actually pull this off. Altitude above terrain is still pretty high. And less than 5 meters per second, so we switch to the other loop. So vertical speed and desired vertical speed. Slowing ourselves down. using the PID controller. Soon the panels should kick in. And we have perfectly landed. The panels did not extract, so maybe I should leave the panels alone. I'm not sure if I should or not. Yeah. They don't have time to retract in that one little second, so maybe I won't fool with them. I'm a little bit worried about them breaking if we land hard. Maybe I should make another loop to retract the panels when we're like, I don't know, 200 meters above the surface or something like that. Something to think about. But I think the landing script worked quite well, even though we had a little bit of a worry with the hill that we might have ran into. But all in all, yeah, I think this was pretty good. So what we would do now is run some action groups to collect all the science, and then take off. But the takeoff script is going to be in a future episode. Let's see what else we have to do. We have another launch window coming up, and I believe we have another plane we need to launch. Next up, we have the Pelican Mark II. I've upgraded the Pelican to be entirely unmanned. That way we can launch a bunch of them in orbit and just have them hang out up there for future interplanetary missions and other types of things without having to worry about them running out of fuel. This particular Pelican is going to be used to top off the moon base that is still sitting in orbit, waiting for its crew to finish their downtime. I won't show most of this, as you've already seen one of these take off. But the interesting thing is that it has gotten a bit of a beak due to using a tail section in the front. It also means that it can offload more fuel, as the nose section, being farther away from the center of mass, will provide more leverage, so we can dump more fuel off and still have the center of lift behind the center of mass. The solar base has finally made it to Kerbal and is performing a bit of an aero brake in the upper atmosphere. If you recall, the solar base does not have a heat shield because we did not have any 2.5 meter heat shields at the time we launched it. So we'll be braking and then achieving orbit at around 100 kilometers and waiting for the ferry to meet up with it, so that all the zillions of Kerbals on top of it, or inside of it, can be evacuated back to the surface. The Minmus taxi is arriving at Minmus and setting up a rendezvous with the Minmus base, where its docking has required a bit of shuffling around. The Minmus lander had to be undocked. Then the taxi docked and the Minimus lander placed back on the end so that it can do landing and gather science and stuff like that. Also coming into dock is the Pelican Mark II, docking with the moon base to offload all of its vast quantities of fuel, or well, most of its fuel. After dropping off the fuel, the Pelican is coming down for a somewhat eventful and tinged landing. I greatly overestimated or underestimated the amount of speed we are going to have, mostly due to the glide characteristics of the plane. So we're having to do an extremely aggressive landing, dropping us deep in the altitude, or deep in the atmosphere, extremely quickly, and trying to slow down from supersonic to subsonic in just a few kilometers. During which I decide that landing on the runway is entirely overrated, so we just go with wherever we can, because beggars cannot be choosers. I was going to drive to the runway, but that did not work out because the ship tilted like that. Because docking is overrated, it is time for all of our Kerbal nuts to abandon the solar base and form a big giant EVA Congo line towards the ferry. Board that, and then everyone can make it home, hopefully. Should have enough life support for everyone to make it home. Now, chock full of Kerbals, the ferry plummets into the atmosphere, hurling itself at hypersonic speed towards the Space Center, having a much less eventful landing than the Pelican, largely due to a much more stable design and not having to deal with shifting center of lift, or center of lift that shifts quite so much, where it safely makes it down and everyone can get all of their nice experience for their long voyage. Alright, let's see how we made out with the solar base. Covered all the parts. So Dudrick did not get anything, but Chimmy, Billy Bobbert, Ursi, Patcott, Hadfin, Limrod, and Jingard have all advanced to level 3. Very, very good. And that is going to be it for this episode. Sorry it took so long to get this episode out. There's been all kinds of real life problems. An electrical storm took out a lot of the wiring and a lot of my electronics. Even with a UPS to protect them, it wasn't enough. Then some health problems and some money problems due to medical bills and repair bills, and some issues at work with increased workload when I was already not feeling well, has made it where I haven't had the time or inclination to even watch YouTube videos, yet alone make them. but I am working on getting some easier to produce videos up, so something will be on the channel. It's still going to be a while until the next Kerbal Space Program video due to not having big chunks of free time that I need to make these kind of episodes. So it'll be at least a few weeks. But anyway, a like if you like, subscribe if you're not, leave a comment if you have anything to say. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time!